All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Pitch Hackers interview series with top investors. Today, we're sitting down with Collin Wallace, who is both a dear friend of mine and has taken the time out of his day to answer many of my questions that I'm hoping, actually, I know will provide lots of value to the community. Thank you so much for joining. Before I, jump into your bio, I really appreciate you showing up today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, super stoked. So Collin has over 20 years of experience as an engineer, inventor, operator, and investor. He's currently a partner at Lobby Capital. Prior to Lobby, he was the managing director of Techstars Silicon Valley, which is where we met. He launched the first two Techstars accelerator programs in the Bay Area in partnership with JP Morgan and eBay. He started his career as the founder and CEO of FanGo, which was Techstars, I think, back in 2010, a leading company in restaurant mobile ordering. In 2011, FanGo was acquired by Grubhub, and then Collin became the head of innovation responsible for OrderHub, new technologies, and a significant portion of Grubhub's pre-IPO patent portfolio. In 2019, he went back to startup land and he co-founded Zero Storefront, which was YC 2019, a data analytics platform for restaurants, which Thanks acquired in 2022. He's an alumni of both Techstars and Y Combinator and spends a lot of time both advising and mentoring at reputable institutions like Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he co-teaches the Startup Garage class. He's also run two Y Combinator Demo Day funds, investing primarily in marketplaces, developer tools, productivity, the future of work, sustainability, and AI. In total, he's invested in over 80 early stage companies, including PayJoy, Landed, Mosaic Voice, Postscript, and Vellum. One of the main reasons why I'm telling you all this is his background is not only incredibly impressive, but I think the way he's gone about his successes is incredibly unique. If you want a really in-depth analysis of his background and how he got here to date, please go listen to the podcast episode built by Lobby Capital called The Fabric, and that will kind of dive into how he got here to date. But genuinely, overall, the TLDR is Collin has just been a really genuine, awesome person throughout his lifetime, and success has followed. So I want to just touch on that at least a little bit today. And it's part of why I felt so called to work with you over the last almost 2 years. So my first question.
Yeah, time flies, right?
Time flies. Yeah, I really appreciate it. So you were tirelessly building the early stages of FanGo. How old were you, by the way?
I was 20 when I first got the idea, and the original version of it was actually called Text Order Go. I'm laughing because I recently was watching this BlackBerry sort of docudrama on AMC, like the history of BlackBerry, and I remember all of those moments, because the first version of this app, it was an applet, and it was built on the BlackBerry OS, and you had to side load it. There's no app store. You had to just hook it up to a computer, run the application on it. But what it did was it would take in your order and it would convert it to binary, and it would text message it to a server. And then the server would decode the zeros and ones, turn it into a fax, and then send the fax to a restaurant. And then someone would deliver you food and you'd pay them in cash because there was no payment rails. So my marketing genius said, oh, you should call it what it does, Text Order Go. And that was literally the name of the business. Then when we built an app for the iPhone, when the iPhone came out in 2007, people were having a lot of trouble because they were trying to text message inside the iPhone app. And so we realized the name was confusing people more than anything. And so we changed it to FanGo.
I was going to say, I liked the simplicity of it. I almost put that in instead of FanGo because, it tells you what it does really quickly. No questions asked.
Yeah, don't let me name your company.
So Collin was basically balancing two jobs. He was working until exhaustion. And I'm blanking on the name of the company. Share more about the name of who you were working with.
Lexmark.
Lexmark.
Yeah, I was working for Lexmark, and it's a classic example of how things can be sort of positive and negative at the same time. I think the negative was the work there was not particularly stimulating, And, it's just kind of a challenging environment in that way. It was also in the middle of the financial crisis, right? So that made things a little bit tricky too, because, there wasn't a lot of job security, and ultimately I actually got laid off from that job. But the bright side was you had a lot of like spare time. In fact, I don't know if I would have built FanGo if I was, in a job that actually required 100% of my brain, bandwidth.
Yeah.
I think in many ways, because it just didn't take a whole lot to perform at Lexmark, it was easy to build something else with sort of the rest of my energy. So,
but still, I mean, working 2 jobs, from that interview that I listened to, it sounds like job 1 ended, you're working until you pass out. And I, that was the vibe I got. And I know that there are other founders out there that are hustling in the same way. And so I'm kind of just curious, what was your driving energy like? Were you fueled by excitement or determination or something else?
So initially I was fueled by like curiosity. I just kind of wanted to see if I could do it, and that becomes its own sort of self-reinforcing drug of just, this is cool, this is interesting, I'm learning a lot. In my mind, I didn't initially think about sort of failure or the repercussions of that, because the way I had defined success was just, is it better than my day job? Which was like such a low bar that there was just no world in which I failed, right? Eventually, though, the company started to get big enough and you started employing enough people that there actually was like a downside, right? Like you could lose something, or there was a consequence to, sort of failing. And I think at that point, you start to be more cautious and more motivated, sort of to not fail in the sort of financial sense, right? To like be able to perform and so on. And then interestingly enough, you cross over into this other zone where you start being really motivated or more motivated by the people who are around you. And that transition happened pretty quickly for me. I'd say within the first year of the business, I went from, oh, this is cool, I'm having more fun than I'm having at work, to, oh, we're making some money, let's not mess this up, to everyone's depending on me to pay their mortgage. If we don't make the right decisions here, there are real consequences to people in their lives. And that's really what fueled me all the way through to liquidity and eventually IPO, for the company as part of Grubhub, was sort of not letting down the team. Like it was the people next to me that I was more motivated by than anything for myself.
So curiosity and then determination to help people also get across the finish line.
Yeah, it's a covenant, right? Like there's a type of leadership that I really learned from my father. He used to call it servant leadership. And it was this idea of like, you become a leader because people choose you, because they choose to follow you. You can't take leadership. It has to be given to you. And the way that people choose to give it to you, or one way, is that you prove to them again and again and again that you're willing to subordinate your own needs and wants in service of theirs. And that was kind of how I thought about it. It's like, if they all do well, I'll do fine, right? And so when people would come in, the first question we'd ask is, what are you hoping to get out of this company? And if I couldn't deliver that for you, I would just tell you.
Yeah.
We didn't try to BS people. Like, it was very, and it's wild because the things that people wanted, were not outlandish things. I mean, I had one engineer who like really wanted to buy a barn and like sit in there and tinker and invent stuff. And, a few months after we IPO'd, guess what he did? Went out and bought a barn and somewhere in Michigan, and, was building lots of interesting things there. I had another engineer who had never lived in a high rise and wanted to live in a high rise. That was his thing. He was like, if whatever we do with this company, it's successful enough that I can live in a high rise building, at least for a little while, then we'll have won. And so you make these commitments to people, and like the way business should be, you do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
Right. We kind of only had two speeds. It was like, we're either doing it or we're dead. Like there's no middle ground. So
What else do you attribute your success to with that first IPO?
luck, like an incredible amount of luck. No one wants to talk about luck in business, right? Because they want it to be this very like repeatable and predictable thing, and it's not. Like, look, we were in this first batch of what was called Accelerate Labs at the time. Eventually, it became Techstars Chicago. There were 10 companies in that batch. We all worked our asses off. Everyone was smart. Everyone worked really hard. And at the end of it all, 3 of the companies survived. And you can't look yourself in the mirror honestly and say, well, the only reason why we survived is because we're smarter than everyone else and we worked harder. Like, yes, we worked hard and yes, we were smart, but that's also not sufficient. You still needed some element of goodwill or blessings or luck or however you want to describe it. The piece that you have control over is that you are alive when it's your turn to be lucky. Like, you can make decisions that prolong your lifeline such that the natural distribution of luck benefits you and you can sort of take advantage of it. But yeah, it was a huge, I mean, we could have gone somewhere else and we wouldn't have been in Chicago. The Grubhub team happened to be in Chicago. They could have, tried to build our solution. That would have been hard, but like they could have decided to be more adversarial instead of saying like, hey, maybe we all merge these companies together because we're stronger together than we would be otherwise. There's just lots of forks in the road that we could have taken a different path. And I think when you look back at it and you look at your rubric for making those decisions, you realize you were kind of like, all right, let's go to Chicago. Like, that was the extent of it. You could have just as easily gone to Dallas or something. So I think it's important to normalize both for yourself and for other founders. Like, there was this element of like just getting lucky, but you can control, I think, the position of the business and sort of the fact that you're still around when it's your turn to be lucky.
So now you're on the other side, you're investing. Obviously, investing is at least a little bit more than just rolling the dice.
You would hope so, right?
Hope
like,
so.
That's the hope.
That's the hope. I know that there's some aspect, of course there is. But, I know you've previously mentioned you like to invest in founders who, although they might not have the clearest idea initially, exhibit extraordinary drive and determination, the kind who, I think you said, quote unquote, run through walls.
Run through walls.
Run through walls.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that. I love that visual.
Like Mr. Kool-Aid. Oh, no. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think every founder I've met has at least some degree of drive. I would hope so, or else they're just totally in the wrong, they should go work for, I don't know, some other company.
Well, some are tourists, right? Like, and we're coming out of an era where there were a whole lot of tourists. There were a whole lot of people that were like, oh, that looks interesting. Like, I'm going to try this founder thing. Only to find out, like, it's not set up for fair weather fans.
Yeah.
Like, it is in many ways a thankless job. It is hard. The economics of it in many cases don't make sense, for people. You can make more money renting your brain to Meta or, Google or what have you. And so in many ways, like, now's actually a really interesting time because it's kind of scared everybody off who wasn't like really about that life.
Yep.
And so you're kind of getting the hardcore founders now.
So how do you, if they don't have the clearest ideas, how do you distinguish those who truly have exceptional qualities? What specific traits do you look for in a founder that signal, in your experience, they're a particularly worthwhile investment?
Yeah, so there's probably 3 components that I would look at. So the first is what I'd call like the integrity test, which is just, are they a good person? Which sounds kind of hokey pokey and like, kind of squishy, but there's real logic and empirical evidence around it, which is, it is almost impossible to craft a good deal with a bad person. It doesn't really matter how much due diligence and how much you negotiate on valuation and all these other things. You'll have a very difficult time getting your capital out of those investments because the founder will find some way to take advantage of you or to scuttle the business or, to harm other employees or stakeholders, right? So you've got to deal with that as like kind of the first question. It's like, is this a decent person with at least enough overlap in shared values that you don't have to watch your back the whole time. Hopefully they don't have to watch theirs as it relates to you, and sort of you're both able to focus on how do you tip the scales to make this company as successful as possible.
Yeah.
That's the first part. The second part is like leadership and to what extent is a founder able to recruit other exceptional people to follow them? Because if you think about it, like there's this process of unlocking these bottlenecks in your business over time, and like each subsequent bottleneck gets to be bigger and it unlocks more value in the process. So what am I saying specifically? When you are starting off, your big bottleneck is usually human capital and at some level learning, right? Which is kind of correlated with the human capital. You're trying to find people to join your team, to help you. You're trying to find customers. You're deal with these like people problems. Then you start to be constrained on capital, right? Like you've got enough people, but now you need capital to go and run tests or to market or to get more people and so on. And that's when your sort of first investor comes in, and maybe it's someone like me, and maybe it's someone who's a little earlier, and they write you a check and they unlock this bottleneck that is financial capital. And immediately after that, your bottleneck becomes human capital, right? Because what do you do with that money? You're like, I need to go find some more sales reps. I need to go build out my team. And so when I'm looking at these companies, yes, it is true. I can help you unlock the bottleneck that is financial, but you also have to lead this charge that is unlocking the bottleneck that will immediately follow that check. That is human capital. And I can introduce you to people and like help you recruit and so on, but they have to want to follow you. And the interesting piece is the more compelling and impressive the person is, the less likely they are to be just like told what to do. The more they have to want to sort of be in that foxhole with you. And so that's a really critical element. I mean, I've seen a lot of companies go sideways because, the leader just wasn't able to exude that level of leadership. They weren't able to build sort of empathy and sort of camaraderie with their team. So that's number two. Number three is the rate of learning. So like how fast are they getting smarter about the problem? And the reason that matters is you can think of part of the founder experience as sort of knowledge arbitrage, right? Like what do you know that everybody else in the market doesn't know? And it turns out that the value of that knowledge and the availability of it are inversely proportionate with time. So like, let me say it sort of in human speak. At time zero, when you're starting off in a new industry, generative AI, let's just say, you don't know very much about this thing and how this market's going to evolve because it's just starting. But if you did, it'd be really valuable to you, right? Because you'd be the only person that knew, like, this is exactly how, generative AI is going to evolve. You'd be like, sort of Biff and Back to the Future 2. You'd have the, like, almanac that tells you all the sports scores, and you'd be able to go and capitalize and build this giant empire. At the end of time, so if you sort of project out, it's the exact opposite, right? Like there's tons of information on this thing that is generative AI for 15 or 20 years from now, but it's not valuable to you anymore because everybody knows these things, right? It's just like a standard thing like HTML or Web 1.0. And so if you think about it, like the journey that the founder is on is trying to accelerate their learning faster than the value of that knowledge depreciates. And the more they're able to deflect from the baseline of knowledge creation, i.e. like what everyone else is learning over time, the more value there is to capture in the business itself. It's like directly correlated with enterprise value. And so it's a long-winded way of saying, if you look at how fast that founder is generating knowledge that diverges from the common belief about a given space, it's usually a good indicator that they're going to be able to sort of create some arbitrage that you can turn into dollars and value in the business. And then the last thing is not really founder related. It's more just like market size. Like, is the market big enough that they do all these other things right? There's actually something to go and capture whereby they can take care of themselves, their employees, investors, and so on.
Totally. And I think you touched on something great earlier with AI being an amazing example. I keep seeing all these shells of ChatGPT and saying that they're doing something novel, right? And those are the folks who are like, oh, I'll try this startup thing, right? But it's not like they've been building something, a neural network over the last 10 years at Stanford or something. So how can you get ahead of the game in that sense? And it's already starting to kind of fall apart with the integrity of what you're building. So
totally. And a lot of those people are like, they are genuine, but maybe uninformed.
For sure.
Right? Like they genuinely want to build, but they don't know what to build. And they are, let me back up some. Like, you could kind of think of it like founders have 3 modes of value creation. It's weird. I have all these like frameworks in my head that I like, just try to organize really complex, like large amounts of information into like very simple and easy to digest principles. There's roughly like 3 modes of value creation as a founder, like orientations for value creation. The first is a solution facing orientation. And that is like, oh, I love generative AI. I need to go and find a problem that I can apply generative AI to. And this like very rarely works. And the reason being, it's kind of like doing guess and check for like a really complex multivariate problem, right? Like you could do it, but it's going to take you an infinite amount of time and an infinite amount of capital. And you're usually going to run out of one or the other, right? So you can kind of push those to the side. And most of the founders you're talking about that are in that just like, oh, I need something to do with generative AI, like that's kind of the trap that they've fallen into. The second sort of orientation for value creation is around the problem, which is like, I have found a problem. I'm now going to go and solve it. And an example might be, man, I can't find a really good, restaurant to deliver to me, on a Friday night. I'm going to go and solve this problem. I am going to create a delivery for Chipotle on Friday nights. And the vast majority of businesses look like that, where they found a problem, they go and solve it. There's some value that's created, and they turn some of that value into money, and that's the business. They tend not to be massive companies. They tend to be like reasonably sized, call it anywhere from 80 to like 200, $300 million. The unicorn level businesses, the big ones, those are ones that almost always have a customer facing orientation, right? Like that is where the value is created. They go and fall in love with a specific customer or customer type, and then they go and build for them. And the sort of narrative goes something like, you really love single moms in suburbia. And it turns out that on Friday nights, those single moms need to feed their kids. And so you go and you build this delivery platform to help them get food delivered to them on Friday nights. And it also turns out that on Friday or Saturday mornings when they wake up, all of a sudden the kids have to get to, Little League practice, and they've got to get to these other places. And so now all of a sudden you're solving that problem for them, and that becomes part of your sort of delivery platform. And then on Sunday, it's, mom's birthday, and you want to deliver some flowers. And now all of a sudden that becomes part of your value proposition. And you can see how all these elements compound, where the steady state, the root of the value creation is the customer. That's the piece that stays static. And then you're varying these relatively easy to move things that are the product and sort of features and components and so on. The hard part to move is the market. Like that's why the solution facing orientation sucks so much. It's like, it's a lot easier to change your product than it is to change people's minds.
Yeah.
And so if you index off of like this thing that's, a solid root system, and then, vary the product, you're going to have a much higher probability of success and like much bigger payouts. But long-winded explanation, but
it is incredibly helpful. And I'm sure for the people who will be listening, about the differences between finding a problem and finding customers who have a problem and following them closely. I don't think a lot of people actually know that there's a difference there, which leads me into my next question. That's probably,
sure.
I want most people to take that away from this as your key piece of advice, because that's a good way to steer a ship in terms of, okay, well, what am I actually doing here? And how far can this scale based off of that? But outside of that, what are some of like the first 3, top 3 pieces of advice you consistently find yourself giving to early stage founders?
Ooh, this is a good one. Yeah, so I think one that I come across a lot with sort of first time early stage founders is, there's a lot of founders who are like exceptional people. It tends to be like a pretty correlated, again, sort of orientation for a founder who's like trying to build something, that they're also like exceptional. They were really good at something in their lives. Maybe they were really smart in class. They were valedictorian or top of their class. They went to some great school. Like there's just some element about them that makes them exceptional. And this is very helpful as it relates to creating solutions and attacking different problems. The challenge is, though, it also definitionally makes you the exception. And so you end up thinking that you're the customer and that you're representative, like what you think is representative of them, and you're not. You're nowhere close to it, because most people have seen that problem again and again and again and said, I'm just going to go on with my day. And you, as the exception, decided you were going to pick that up and make it your cause. You're not representative of the broader population. So the number of times that I see founders come in and make these assumptions about the user base because of what's in their own head, and then it turns out that is not borne out in reality, it's probably the most common cause of death for founders. Is not that they couldn't get the technology right or build a product or something along those lines. They build a product that solves the wrong problem, or a problem that doesn't exist at all, at least not in the ways that they think it does. So that's probably number one. I think, number two is seeing founders define the problem that they're solving for with what I'd call like ambiguous adjectives. These like really squishy words that don't mean anything, or they mean a million things to 500,000 people. So what are examples? Like
revolutionizing.
There's no good solution. Yeah, like there's no good solution for generating art. Like we're going to create one that's great. Okay, great. What does great mean? And when you ask a founder that, like they have this sort of like smack forehead emoji response, because no one ever thought about it. Like your whole business is built on this idea of building a product that's faster, and no one knows what faster is. No one's bothered to ask a customer, like, well, what do you mean by fast when you say fast? Or give me a product that you're using that is fast. Give me a product you're using that's not fast, right? And in that way, you're able to convert what is maybe qualitative feedback from a customer into empirical metrics that you can evaluate your solution against. So like you think your solution works, but it only works to the extent that it moves the metrics or variables that are important to your customer. So you got to know what those are. And if fast is, it's got to be sub 2 minutes, then if your product is doing it in 4 minutes, it's not going to work. But if you just define it as fast, whatever's in your head, then it's easy to tell the story of like, 4 minutes, that's pretty fast.
Yeah.
It might be fast, but not fast enough, right? So I think being really clear on what is the objective or outcome that your customer or user is trying to achieve, and how will they measure whether or not they have achieved it. Then all of a sudden you can unlock your full brain power to figuring out this whole slew of solutions that might possibly deliver that outcome.
And at what stage, obviously you should continue to ask your customers questions as you grow, but at what stage are people generally missing these cues, really? And then when do they fall off? Because I could see it's like, oh, wow, 4 times faster. That's a hot metric to go share with an investor. And then when do you actually kind of see shit hit the fan? I'm asking because I think it'll help founders hopefully mitigate the shit hitting the fan.
It's pretty early on, right? Like if you think about building a business, kind of like building a skyscraper, right? The problem definition is the foundation. It is literally the thing that everything else is built on. So you get the problem wrong, your solution's screwed, your channels are all wrong, your key value props are all wrong, your revenue model's all wrong. Like it's no different than building a skyscraper on a listing foundation, doesn't matter if you get to the 50th floor, like it's going to be off by like 10 degrees, like the Millennium Tower or whatever in San Francisco, right? It's a great example. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, if you think about building a skyscraper, you're going to spend half the time of the entire project laying the foundation. And then the rest of it will be like throwing up these like successive, floors that are all carbon copies of each other. And building a business is no different. It's going to take you a long time to actually understand the problem and define it properly. And then it will be like significantly easier to start like solving for it and building the rest of the company around it. And so to your question, I think it's a very foundational thing. Like it's something that you have to get right, and you have to get it right from the beginning. If you get it wrong, it really doesn't matter what else you do in the business. You're probably not going to succeed. And if you get it right, like the rest of the business becomes infinitely easier. And so I would encourage founders to like very much start with that, like your hypothesis on what you think the problem is, go and validate it. And then you can come back with your, solution hypothesis. Like, what do you think the solution might be? And you have this very empirical rubric now to measure, like, okay, did it actually solve the problem?
Yeah.
No, not yet. All right, turn this dial. Great, let's try it again. Oh, turn the dial again. Okay, now we've got it. And then you scale, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it was great. And I think, when I think of Techstars, a lot of them have figured out, when they come in to the program, a lot of them have figured out the majority of the problem piece. But I'm assuming they haven't figured out all of it, or else they wouldn't be coming to you as an accelerator.
Sure.
And that's part of the value add, right? Is what you're telling me today, is to help them get across these humps to be able to go out and actually scale and grow. But one of my questions was, you were a part of Techstars Chicago back in 2011, and at the time it was an exciting new trend of something called an accelerator. And now that accelerators are more integral part of the startup ecosystem, do you see any emerging structures or programs that offer additional innovative benefits outside of the traditional accelerator model? I'm hearing things like pre-accelerators.
Yeah, I think very similar to the knowledge arbitrage that founders have to excel at. The accelerators are also their own form of arbitrage, right? Which is, there's a gap between maybe the knowledge that you need as a founder and what you might have access to, or network or capital. And so to the extent that the accelerator can help fill that gap, there's a lot of value that's unlocked.
Yeah.
I think where founders can get in trouble is if you're in a program or you're in an accelerator where it's not filling that gap, or where you're not clear about what you need to get or take away from an accelerator in order for the value to manifest. I think that's where you end up in a bad situation, where you've given up equity in the business and you didn't get a lot in return. When I went through Techstars in Chicago, I think we contributed 5% of, sort of our common stock to the pool, like to fund the programs and to create upside for the stakeholders. And the business was worth infinitely more because of it. Like, I absolutely would have given them 10% or 15%. And the reason being, because the value I got from it, the things I needed, they delivered on, in surplus. And I was able to capture some piece of that for myself, right? And for our employees and so on. So like everyone won. I think that's one part of it. The other part is you can kind of make this distinction between, people who are investors and people who are backers. And I like to think of myself as a backer. It's like a huge piece of my set of values. And the difference is, an investor is looking for a return on capital, right? They give you money. They're looking for some multiple of that money to come back. A backer is looking for a return on you. And so some component of that might be capital, but some of it might be advice. Some of it might be introductions or letting you borrow some of their reputation. And, I had people like Troy Hennekoff and Sam Yegan, Brian Lewerson, who were backers. And so, yeah, like they put money in and some insights in on FanGo, and we all did well and returned, more than the fund, a couple multiples there, like with our exit and so on. But that's not where it stopped.
Yeah.
Brian became a great advocate and friend for me. Sam became a mentor and helped me understand better on investing and how to build a company and scale and build an organization. Troy has always been, a big supporter in all those things. And so my point is, you have to evaluate the accelerators, one, through this lens of where are the gaps in your business, and is this specific accelerator going to help you fill those? Yeah. And then two, you have to evaluate the accelerators as a function of time, which is not like, okay, is this going to be a great thing for this one deal or this one part of a deal for this one round? But is this going to pay dividends over the course of my career, which might be 30 or 40 years? I'm 15 years out from Techstars, and it's still helping me and supporting me and so on. I'm 5 years out from YC, and it's still helping me and supporting me and all of those things. And so what's the price for that? I don't know. Yeah. It's a lot larger than 5 or 6 or 7%. I can tell you that much.
For sure. I mean, you talked about in your episode with Lobby, the idea of the short term and the long term game, and that the return at the end of the day for the long term game is so much more impactful than just having to return your fund with one investment.
Absolutely, and you will see. The crazy part is you'll see all of these people again. Mm-hmm. The job. When I took the role to launch the Techstars programs in Silicon Valley, the guy who called me to tell me about that and said, "Hey, you should do this," was a guy named Ethan Austin, who runs Outside Ventures now. And Ethan was in Techstars with me. He was a founder with me. They had a company called Give Forward. And his co-founder, Desiree Vargas Wrigley, she is an investor in Chicago, and we share a ton of deal flow in companies. I mean, she's up there crushing it. There was another woman in that batch named Sue Kim, who runs Brilliant.org, and her board is, Sam Yegan and Chamath, from Facebook, right? She's crushing it. That company's hundreds of millions of dollars in value. Kin Insurance, Sean Harper, he was in that batch. Sheil Manat from Better Tomorrow Ventures was in our batch as well. Josh Kroll, the co-founder of Boom Technologies, like the supersonic jet. So my point is, like, if you think about it in this myopic transactional sense, like, you're going to just shortchange yourself, because you will inherently, on this journey as a founder, you will inherently run into people who are exceptional and are doing exceptional things. And if you're not a jerk and you think long term, like, they'll continue to be part of your support system, your network, your community, your deal flow, your LPs, your investors, you name it. But you have to cultivate it with a long-term mindset and think of it as an infinite game as opposed to a finite one.
I wrote a post. I went to Techstars Demo Day. I wrote a post about what I think one of the most unique qualities is about that program. And it's not network, it's community. And the difference is network, you go out to a networking event, you exchange numbers, maybe you message back and forth on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you go on LinkedIn. That's right.
But community is this right here. I mean, you're on my podcast, my interview series. We've become, friends, and the network effects of us connecting on a genuine level. This is just one example. The ripple effects are massive. And that's why I was so excited to have you today, is you're such a good example of, you show up with curiosity and you keep moving forward. You try not to be an asshole. And generally, things tend to work out, it makes it so simple. And it's relatively unique in terms of continuing to lead with that way and having so much trust. I call it like trust in the universe. Silicon Valley is, continuing to lead with curiosity and expansion. And I think you do that very well in all aspects of your life. And I see it today as you go into Lobby Capital. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to talk about Lobby.
Yeah, sure.
Because it also ties into that as well, as you find these unique VC firms that you describe Lobby, or Lobby describes Lobby as being heavily human capital oriented, and you've touched on it briefly.
Totally.
But just share more about, like, what does this mean in a practical sense, and in what ways does Lobby Capital offer support to founders that's around this human capital centric approach?
Yeah, and I think it dovetails into like your philosophy, right? I mean, I think that's part of the reason why all of us resonate with each other is a shared set of values. And in many ways, our relationship is like the relationships that we have with our founders or with each other as partners, where in many ways you're reflecting back what you're receiving, right? Like my engagement with you is a reflection of you and vice versa. And I think that's what allows the relationship to be strong. So Lobby is a Series A or early stage investor. We do late seed, we do Series A, usually $5 to $15 million checks. We're industry agnostic. We'll invest in anything that's got a great team behind it, and that's got a substantive enough market that we can help you build into and sort of capture some real value. Look, to your point, the capital is fungible. You can get capital from a lot of places. Like if you're coming to us and you just need money and that's all you want, like we're probably not the right firm for you. The thing that we believe, and I think that we have seen and lived, is that very quickly after you get that capital, the next constraining variable becomes, can you continue to fuel the growth of that business with human capital, with people who are willing to follow you and who can be meaningful inflections in the trajectory of that business. And in our case, we have spent a lot of time and energy building those relationships. And, to your earlier point, you kind of think of it like chemistry, where you have sort of strong bonds and you have weak bonds. If you remember sort of like freshman, sophomore year. And the challenge with weak bonds is when you pull on them, they break. And it's only the strong bonds that you can rely on, that like when you need more energy or when you need to move, a molecule, that it will actually stay intact. And this is what happens is you have these like weak ties or these weak bonds within a lot of people's networks. And then they go to make the phone call. Hey, can you help me with this? And the person's like, hey, I'm busy. I got to walk the dog, or we're heading to Hawaii. We don't have people like that in our network. Like we only build the community and the ecosystem with strong bonds such that there is reliability and there's integrity in pulling on them and knowing that when you call René Lacerte, CEO of Bill.com, and you say, hey, René, I got this interesting fintech company I'd love for you to take a look at, he will take your call and he will sit down and he will talk to that company for an hour and he will do whatever's necessary to pay into the same ecosystem that paid into him at a time when he wasn't, René Lacerte, sort of, the CEO of Bill.com. And so the whole Lobby ecosystem looks like that. We have 4 sort of conferences a year, one for enterprise, one for consumer, and then one that's focused on female founders and one that's focused on founders of color. And we had the Founders of Color Summit last Thursday. And it's a great example of like, this is not a deal flow exercise for us. We're not there to like just fund and so on. We're there because there's a group of founders that we believe have a lot of value to present and to offer into the ecosystem that may not be getting all the information they need on fundraising and on each other and, sort of how the markets have changed. And we go and plug that gap. And who knows what that will manifest? Like who would have known that Sean Harper was going to, after Fee Fighters, go and build Kin, which became one of our portfolio companies that is crushing it, right? Who would have known that? Well, you wouldn't, right? So in many ways, you can do tremendously well by just treating each of those relationships as if it's a strong bond, like turn it into one. And so anyways, that's us. Like that is the ethos. I think you'll find it from every partner in our firm, and it's not going to change anytime soon. It's
great. And I mean, I think the more maybe my ethos is, VCs and founders turned into VCs, where that is their whole goal, is creating this ethos, And I keep hearing the same thing. It's, you know, I want to write a post about it now where it's like community and integrity, and now, you know, playing the long game, but it's all interconnected with those three. And I love that. I think that's kind of the new phase of Silicon Valley from now to what it was 15, 20 years ago, is you have all these people who did the thing and now they want to go and give back. And I just love it. I want people to see that side of Silicon Valley. So thank you so much for coming on and providing all of that. And just being an awesome person, an awesome founder, and awesome investor.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you for helping be one of the big nodes and anchors in the community, just continuing to give first. Yeah, you're absolutely crushing it. So certainly appreciate it too.
Thank you, Collin. All right, guys. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you next week.